Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Battle of the BR's podcasts, not podcast thing. I'm Skia, and I am joined today by a very special guest. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Ben Vollmer. You probably refer to me more as Bengerman10 Skia.
Yeah,
I
Bongerman 10.
yeah, nobody gets it quite right. But it was a bad pun. I've been in video games. I guess I've been covering video games now for 7 years, which it dates me a little bit. And just the last couple of years, I've been right up there with you, Skia, on in terms of just loving battle royales. It hooked me in a way that like I hadn't since maybe Halo 2, Halo 3 back in the day. Um,
Yeah.
and currently, I'm in graduate school studying media effects and video games. So doing a lot of stuff right now revolving around video games. My whole life kind of somehow ended up here, but that's me.
Yeah, and that's awesome because I know I've mentioned Epilogue Gaming like here and there, just in passing in videos and on streams and stuff like that. But for those of you that don't know, Ben is part of this. Well, first it was like your community, and it sort of evolved into, correct me if I'm wrong, like Epilogue Gaming and sort of that whole thing, right?
Yeah, so I was doing freelance. I still occasionally do it. I was doing freelance for a few different websites, IGN, and then I was doing editing for PC Gamer.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I sort of just decided that I wanted to start covering video games in my own way.
Mm-hmm.
So I developed Epilogue Gaming, which was a website that sort of had a more serious tone, which is probably foreign to this podcast.
What do
but
you mean?
I started doing some writing there, and it did kind of emerge into sort of a community focused thing. But yeah, I do a lot of writing about video games. I just love talking about video games. I think more so than even playing them, which is the interesting thing for me in Fortnite, because I haven't gotten a chance to talk about Fortnite a whole lot. I've
Mhm.
played it over like 1,000 hours, so this is a really unique game to me because I've talked about it so much less than I've played it, and usually it's vice versa.
Right. And yeah, I was actually gonna mention that I know you're a variety streamer, primarily.
Hmm.
And sometimes you do focus in on some things, like I know you have community nights, and you're very into Mario Kart a lot of the times. But Fortnite is like, and maybe it's just since I've been watching you, but like Fortnite is kind of took me by surprise when you sort of just got way into it. Like even on
Yeah,
your stream, you were just constantly streaming it, and I was like, oh, okay, so he's gonna have a different game today. Oh no, it's Fortnite again. Awesome.
yeah, it was Fortnite all the time. It's all I could think about. And in a lot of ways, it is really interesting because you mentioned like I do tend to bounce around from game to game, and that's always been a part of not just like what I like to do as a streamer, which is more of a hobby, but that's what I've had to do for work. Just bouncing from game to game to
Mhm.
make sure I have a perspective on everything. And Fortnite really shook that up because I hadn't felt so hooked into anything in so long. And the weird thing is like I don't just play shooters. Like I'm not just somebody who plays shooters.
Oh, for sure.
And so it is weird. You're right that this was something that I got so into because it's not like me. It's the only game I've played over 1,000 hours since I was a teenager.
Mhm.
So like that says something.
Yeah, and I feel like that's the case for a lot of people who sort of try out Fortnite. Um, it's one of those games, and I kind of feel like maybe Overwatch is kind of similar, where some people that don't even like shooters, some people that don't even like video games, tend to like Fortnite still.
Yeah, and I've asked myself about that a lot, and I think if we're talking about Overwatch, those Fortnite and Overwatch share something in common, and that's that they have like a built-in world that people can get invested in.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I know that at some point we're going to be talking about how Fortnite differentiates itself. For me, the big thing is that it created a world that I liked to be in. Like it wasn't just that I liked playing the game or that the central mechanics were interesting to me. It was that I liked roaming that island, that stupid island, and it didn't matter if it was like the 150th time that I'd done it. But I love to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is kind of like a huge step past what PUBG was, which is just this like almost anonymous feeling, like void of just like you're on a plane and now you're here.
Oh yeah,
What
yeah.
the heck is Pachinki, you know?
Right. Like there's nothing else behind it. I couldn't craft even my own narrative as to why I was there.
Hmm.
When playing PUBG. But Overwatch again sort of helped create that narrative behind its characters. It's like I found a reason to care about the characters. With Fortnite, it felt like the story was different every single time I dropped. Like
Hmm.
it was never gonna feel the same. 2 rounds were never gonna feel the same. So that was, I think, a big part of why, and you probably have seen it with other people. um Fortnite has a way of like going outside of its central mechanics to say, hey, like, we're interesting for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, when PUBG, you think about it, and it's like I personally got more invested in PUBG just for like the style of it, but at the same time, I felt it was hard to be addicted to that game after Fortnite came out because Fortnite was just so much more memorable. And as someone who's probably less into like the lore and the world of it, uh, Overwatch and like Fortnite have like these memorable like I don't know what you'd call it. I guess these like not only just the mechanics, but like the look of it and the feel of it. Like I may not know Tracer's backstory, but I know, hey, that's Tracer. I may not know a lot about Fortnite, but it's like, hey, that's that's what's it called? Tilted
Tilted
Towers?
Towers, yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, that's the classic 4x4 build, and it's got all the stuff in it. Whereas it's like PUBG, there's not a lot to latch on to. It's like, oh, that is a assault rifle that killed you from somewhere where you don't know.
Right. Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head earlier. It's kind of like an amorphous blob, like PUBG, and I mean that in a nice way, I hope.
Right. Yeah.
To people who are fans of the game.
Hmm.
It's when you step into that game, it's all about the way that it functions around its mechanics. So like
Hmm.
everything, whether you die or don't die, is ultimately whether or not you're good or bad at the game, like whether or not you're doing the right thing at the right time.
Hmm.
And Fortnite introduced a whole bunch of variables, which I think certainly has frustrated a lot of people who take shooters very seriously. Like I think even myself when I first started, and I know certainly because we've played enough Fortnite together
All right.
to say like that was something that bothered you a little bit, is like there are variables sometimes that are out of your control, and that doesn't necessarily make for the best competitive shooter. And so I think a lot of people who have been inside of that community for a long time, of like following along with games like CS:GO and Halo and whatever, Gears of War, like tactical shooters,
Hmm.
it comes across as being almost like a little bit childish, even though I really like to move away from that phrasing.
Hmm.
I certainly understand why people felt that way.
Yeah. When I think about what you just said, I remember when I wanted people to play Fortnite with me. I made a lot of friends in Team Fortress 2, and I said, if you like Team Fortress 2, you're probably gonna like Fortnite because they do feel very similar. Where it's like you have to be able to aim and you have to like get a good feel of the game, and sort of like what your character can do. And even though TF2 is a class-based shooter, it still feels very similar. Where it's like Kitty, it's not that CS:GO, PUBG kind of realistic feel, but in a cartoony, I guess, sort of way, yeah, it does have that quote unquote hardcore feel without actually being hardcore.
Yeah, I think the TF2 is probably the best example, if, best comparison for Fortnite. And obviously they're different genres
Hmm.
of shooters, but I think they both have character. And when I'm looking at something that I've dropped so many hours into, I think it has a lot to do with if I'm able to invest myself in that world. And again, Team Fortress 2 did a really nice job of everything feels like it's lived in. There's
Yeah.
life in
Hmm.
that game, and so I think that for the same reason, Fortnite hooked me, and it was just I probably ultimately like Team Fortress 2, and I've poured hundreds and hundreds of hours into Team Fortress 2 as well.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, if I played Fortnite more than I did TF2 or really any other shooter in my life, I think it's because it was like this amalgamation of pop culture and like a DreamWorks art style, and it also had mechanics that I liked and was able to like I always felt like I was getting better. And there was just all those things wrapped into one. And I don't think you could ever, like 100 years from now, we're gonna have a really hard time explaining why Fortnite blew up the way that it did. But I think it was just like perfect circumstance. This was a game that a lot of people were looking for, and we just didn't know it.
I think that's a really good point that I definitely want to come back to later because that's definitely like one of the things I had in my mind that we had to cover.
Sure.
I also want to say I really liked your phrasing, like it feels lived in.
Hmm.
That's a really good way to phrase it because I mean, even a lot of the things that I like better, I feel like that's a core mechanic or a core feature of a game that uh you think of it that way and it's kind of like, oh yeah, that's why this game felt a lot more homey. That's why I kind of like just felt happy walking around in it.
Yeah.
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 So before I guess we get too far into it, just for folks that have actually been living under some kind of rock, we're talking about Fortnite. What is this video game?
Yeah, well, that's a really tricky question for a lot of reasons
Hmm.
because Fortnite wasn't always
Yeah, that's
Fortnite
why I
Battle
asked
Royale.
you.
Yeah, so originally like a fortress building survival game, where you're essentially protecting yourself from hordes of enemies. And I played a little bit of this again. Like I think the art style was always there for me. I was always
Hmm.
like, yes, that looks like a game I would like. And I traditionally do like the kind of survival horde based gameplay modes, but ultimately there was something missing, and I think that thing that was missing was other people, not just in like a co-op sense, but like I I wanted this world to feel alive from other people. Like other people
Hmm.
needed to help structure a story. And that as soon as the battle royale dropped, it took a couple of weeks before I gave it a try. And then all of a sudden it became this game that a lot of people were comparing to PUBG because unless I'm mistaken, there really weren't a whole lot of, it was kind of PUBG and then it was Fortnite. There wasn't a whole lot in between for the battle royale genre,
Yeah,
and a lot of people saw it as like a copycat.
I do remember that, but I guess that's pretty much any major game of a genre, and then the
Sure.
game that follows it. Uh,
Yeah,
Thanks a
and
lot, gaming community.
PUBG, yeah, PUBG deserves a lot of credit for setting up what ultimately I think is now the most successful game of all time. And PUBG is still holding up in its own right, but Fortnite became this game where it wasn't just about the genre. It was like, how do you even explain a game that has these battle royale mechanics, but also has this distinct like MMO feel where there's storylines every couple of months. And I distinctly remember the first moment where there was an event in game, and it happened at the same time for everybody who was playing. And just this like robot thing just shot out of the sky, and everybody was watching it. Like we were still in the middle of a battle royale game, but nobody cared about
Hmm.
that part of it. Everybody was just watching like this event that was taking place on screen. And again, it sort of became this thing that was far beyond the genre itself. It wasn't just about being the last person alive. It was also about how, like, what can I do uh, to gain a better understanding of how this world works, like how this weird Fortnite world works. And so it became, there obviously it also sort of set the stage for like the battle passes and things like that. So it was sort of a blend between like a survival shooter and this like sort of larger MMO with events and things like that. So I think that ultimately is what Fortnite is, but I'm not sure there's ever going to be somebody who's able to sit down and explain exactly what Fortnite is. It's a weird grouping of a bunch of different things, which again is why I think it worked so well.
Yeah. I mean, you have obviously the shooting mechanic, which is the primary thing in battle royales now. You have the building, which, oh my god, I don't. We'll talk about building in a second, but
Good.
wow,
I'm excited for that
what a
conversation.
massive thing.
Yeah.
And then gathering resources, and like you were saying, there's that huge mech cinematic, and then there was the whole like Avengers Thanos thing.
Oh yeah.
And they just do so much, and they ask the player to often like look around the course. Like you get these like quests for like experience and V-Bucks and whatever, battle points, whatever it is. and it's like, can you find these tokens? Can you find these locations? And it's like, oh wow, it's asking me to do more than just, be the victory royale person.
Yeah, like I remember doing a quest that involved racing a golf cart around the map,
Oh yeah.
like that was I spent hours doing things like that.
Mhm.
So it really is difficult to say. But I think it starts with the shooting still.
Yeah.
I'd argue that the building is still secondary, even though that is the mechanic that everybody's going to remember about this game.
Mhm.
Just finding somebody. I think the big thing for me is, Fortnite is really hilly in the way that like not many other battle royales are, and
Mhm.
there's like a lot of that feeling of when you're low on like on a hill,
Mhm.
and you're looking up because you're trying to climb up on a hill, and you're obviously trying to avoid the encompassing gas or whatever they have a name for it.
It's storm in this game,
The
Ben.
storm, yeah, storm. So the storm is encroaching on you, and you're trying to get closer to the middle, and just seeing like somebody's head pop out from on top of that hill, right, is just one of those one of the things that makes battle royale so fascinating and uh so tense, is
Yeah.
like seeing that one moment, and then taking your shot and hitting or missing it. And that's what the game comes down to ultimately, is are those small moments. Now of course they added on to what PUBG had already sort of established with the building mechanic. So I don't know if you had any specific questions about the building mechanic, but I am very excited to talk about it.
Uh, of note, actually, I remember uh, we had this huge feud going on, like when the game was still early, like maybe even before season one came out, but like I think it was around season one, maybe season two, while the game was still like relatively fresh. People were
Hmm.
still like learning how to be very good. I had this thing, and I was like dead set because I'm a stubborn guy. I was like, building is not important in Fortnite. I'm not gonna build at all. Maybe a wall here and there, but I'm not gonna do it. And you were just like, Skia, you're dumb. I remember we had this every time we'd play together, we'd have a conversation like this, and if I would manage to get a kill without building, I'd be like, "Ha, told you, I'm
Told you.
right."
Well, it's interesting because we briefly discussed this earlier, but when I first picked up the game, my brother told me I had to try it. Like this is something I probably would have tried at some point down the road.
Mhm.
My brother, who doesn't really play video games, he's like, "You've got to try this Fortnite
Yeah,
thing."
see, there it is
So I
again.
sit down and I'm playing it. I'm like crouching inside of a building. He's like, "You're gonna have to learn how to build." And I was like, "No, I will not." And this is still early in the game, but I I start shooting at somebody outside of a window, and they quickly build this like fortress up. It was a small, smaller than what we know today,
Mhm.
as like these awesome towers that people have been able to concoct in like 2 seconds.
Mhm.
But it was impressive. And all of a sudden, this guy had as much leverage as I did, even though I was the one in the building, and
Mhm.
I had this angle. And that I think is really, really unique, and it's going to be hard for anybody to replicate. Is being able to, skill your way into being in a better position. So it wasn't just about it wasn't just about movement anymore. It was, even if somebody else has the advantage over me, I'm able to sort of even everything up by, skillfully building. Which I think at the time, Skia, there was 4 different types of build. There was a roof, there's walls, there was stairs, and I want to say the little pyramid was still there at the very beginning,
Yeah,
which is now much more popular than it was.
yeah.
So
That's close enough to write to where I wasn't able to keep track of what wasn't.
yeah, I wish I could go back to these early days of like playing
Hmm.
Fortnite, because it was such an interesting time. Um, it really, I haven't been a part of a learning experience like that in a video game in forever. It's really, it's hard, even like going back and playing like CS:GO or something like that. It's That game has been around so long, and to
Hmm.
have been there at the very beginning of its roots, I just wasn't a part of that. But Fortnite, I can look back and say, hey, I was there at the beginning, and I remember how this game was developing and how people were learning.
Hmm.
And it was just a fascinating thing, and it was all because of the building mechanic.
Yeah. And I guess yeah, to kind of take a step back more, like specifically the building mechanic itself, it's definitely a huge deal to be able to learn how to do that, and like you said, like getting that positioning is huge. I would almost relate it like we kind of talked about like who can really replicate a Fortnite or have that same kind of feel. And I do think that's going to be difficult largely because of the building. I think about it in terms of what like rocket jumping or sticky jumping is in TF2,
Yeah.
where it's like it is a skill that you have to learn. It's not like easy. Like you can build a wall in Fortnite, you can do a basic rocket jump in TF2, but like when you see someone fly across the map and you're just like, how did he do that? And he just like gets like 5 kills behind because he's the greatest soldier ever. Um, it's the same feel of when someone like builds a fortress around you and you're just like, oh man, I'm a caught off a little off guard here.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, Skia. That's exactly what makes Fortnite so compelling is that it's visual. It's like I can see why somebody is better than me, which is
Yes.
really difficult with things like PUBG. It's sort of hard to replicate. Like, oh, obviously it's just they aimed better than me, but how
Right.
did they aim better than me? Like how we don't know exactly what's going on inside of their heads but before or after they get that kill. But with Fortnite and with Team Fortress 2, it's visualized. It's all visual. And it's like you can see, it's like, oh, I want to learn how to do that. And that was an amazing feeling, is being like seeing something and saying, I can do that. Like that's something I can do inside of this game. That's wicked. That's really neat. So yeah, I think that's part of what made Fortnite so interesting is that everything you could get better at, you'd see other people doing it. So
Yeah. Yeah, and it's so unique too because we think about like battle royales or even games since Fortnite by and large, like what has been unique enough to like be compared to that building aspect. Specifically like in BRs, it's like, I mean the what's it called, Blackout, the Call of Duty one. It was just like that was basically faster PUBG. Apex, it's got some cool classes and stuff like that. But a class-based shooter, it's just basically you take ingredients from one genre, put it into BR, and that's it. When are we gonna get something as unique as that Fortnite building mechanic? I'm not sure. We might not.
yeah, we may never see something like that again, which is okay. That's just like you said, that's how genres in video games work.
Mm,
Like usually the most creative stuff we see right at the beginning, and then it's iterated on
yeah.
to death, and then we move on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
But the fascinating thing here is, Skia, that this game is still so popular. And when we're looking back on like what is it that not only made it popular at the time of its release and allowed it to become maybe the most popular video game of all time,
Mm-hmm.
but what has made it to the point where people are still so interested in playing and experiencing it.
Yeah.
And I think it's that very fine line between everything feeling learnable but also the skill ceiling feeling extremely high and always
Extremely
having
high.
room to get better. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's something I actually want to kind of talk about a little bit more is the skill ceiling because I do think that's Fortnite's one of Fortnite's best and worst qualities. But
Interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
again, we'll get to that probably even soon because I think we're about due to start launching into other things. So we kind of established fairly well like what Fortnite is as a game. It's kind of a cartoony fun thing with a huge unique building mechanic and often these wacky items and guns. Like there's a time you could like teleport and fly, and there were vehicles that no one liked but they keep putting them in the game.
Oh yeah, all of that still exists. Yeah.
Yeah. um so as far as it is as a specifically inside of the genre of battle royales or subgenre, whatever. What does this do that kind of excels beyond even its like future competitors, so like Apex, but also like what it's done in the past? Why should I play Fortnite? What kind of gamer am I if I will prefer Fortnite above the others?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it does start with the way that it looks.
Mm-hmm.
There's there is a lot. I think we've already kind of lived through this period in video games, Skia, but there is a lot of like realistic, gritty looking shooters that just sort of blend together. And Fortnite has created a distinct look for itself. That's a big deal. Like no matter we are visual beings,
Mhm.
and having a distinct look is important. Um, and then I also think there is this balance between. Have you ever heard of the concept of flow? You probably have. But like, have you ever heard somebody just say like, "Oh, I'm really in a state of flow right now," or like anything similar to that?
Like if they're like high or
No, not if they're high, but like they're in the zone. So usually people like refer to it as "I'm in the zone." Like, have you heard somebody say that before?
yeah.
Yeah. So it's actually like a psychological concept of, you know, anything that is slightly has a skill ceiling slightly higher than where we're at currently, but
Mhm.
not so high that we get frustrated trying to achieve it.
Right.
And when we get in that zone, we're achieving like a state of flow. So all of a sudden, what feels like 10 minutes has been an hour or 2 hours, and
Mhm.
that's what Fortnite always was for me. It was like I always felt like that I could get a little better. It was just a little more practice, I could get a little bit better. And I think Fortnite has continued by introducing items all the time, and now we've learned that a lot of this might be due to things like crunch and things like that on the part of developers.
Mhm.
But like the always introducing new things and new things to learn. I think that was a big part of it, and it has allowed Fortnite to kind of like hold its ground as being the more influential battle royale. And there are a lot of them. Like you said, Apex was a big deal in 2019. It's still a
Mhm.
big deal in 2020.
Mhm.
PUBG is still a big deal. So I think those are the two things that really help keep things moving along for Fortnite. But again, there are people like me, and I'm not saying there are a lot of people like me, but I love seeing what's next in that world, in that universe, because anything feels possible. The fact that we did have something like Thanos in is such a weird. It makes no sense. There's no reason I should be excited about it,
Yeah.
but like it exists, and I feel like in Fortnite anything is possible. If you told me right now that like a year from now, we would have some sort of crossover between like Fortnite and Smash Bros, or Fortnite and we have, of course, the John Wick crossovers, like was one of
Right.
the biggest
Mhm.
deals. But if you told me Harry Potter was going to pop up in Fortnite next year, I would believe you, because that's just the kind of thing that Fortnite can do. And so I really love pop culture, and Fortnite feels like the pop culture game. So while I don't think that really answers your question, I can say that's what helps put Fortnite above everything else for me. That's one of the reasons I still look forward to all of its updates. It's why I still follow people who stream it
Mhm.
and create content about it. So I think that three reasons really that Fortnite continues to press on.
Yeah, and I mean, not too long ago, you were able to play as a lovely cast of Star Wars characters with lightsabers.
Right. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's yeah, it's definitely able to just do whatever it wants to. It's able to constantly like feed gamers with something that's new, something that's fresh, and it's not always gonna deliver what they want. Like I know every time they release any kind of mech or vehicle or plane or anything like that, people generally tend to not like it.
Oh
But
yeah, those mechs in particular.
yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, at least they're adding something. When a game adds something that players don't like and they fix it, the players get mad and keep playing.
Yeah.
When a game
Yeah.
doesn't add anything, the game dies.
Right.
And so that's part of why Fortnite is definitely still around.
Hmm.
Um More specifically, I guess if I was to add on to that, it's what we've already talked about pretty much, which is that more unique experience. Not only just kind of like the relatable like pop culture and like new stuff, but honestly, like if you want a more unique experience, you're gonna want to play Fortnite, because as Apex can feel very different from Blackout and PUBG and Realm Royale, if
Oh
we're gonna
yeah.
talk about that one. Uh, you're gonna get like relatable things in all those games. You're like, oh, it's kind of like this game. Oh, it's kind of like this game. But I can't say, oh,
Right.
you build. And if someone says, oh, kind of like Minecraft, I'm like, no,
No.
stop.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny, Ski. I just wanted to point out real briefly that for a moment in time, Realm Royale was Fortnite's biggest competitor.
What a world.
yeah, what a world. That was something that existed. I think people still play that game.
I
But
heard it made a comeback, but we're actually playing or bleh, next episode, I guess, as a preview. I'm gonna be sitting down with someone, and we're
yeah.
gonna be going over kind of the lost slash forgotten slash maybe coming back group of battle royales. So
Nice.
yeah,
Nice. I'm excited to listen to that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that'll be
Lots
a
of
whole thing.
interesting stuff. What a fascinating genre. In like 2 years, we've gotten all of this. Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
amazing.
very weird. And like I almost
Mhm.
didn't believe you when you said 2 years. It is, yeah, been like 2 or 3 years or
At
something like
least,
that.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and it's just wow. Huh. Anyways, I guess it is only fair. We've been very kind to the game, I think. I know you like the game a lot more than me, and I do like it. I still, play the game here. I've got a friend group that I play with still. What does this game kind of lack in comparison to other BRs, or maybe just has faults as a game in general?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think with that variation that comes from every match feeling different,
Hmm.
that's also the worst thing about it is that there are times where I'll die or where I'll get a kill or even a win where it's like somebody fell from a high tower and that was it. Like that was the way it ends.
Hmm.
And it had nothing to do with my skill level or their skill level. It's just that sometimes in Fortnite weird stuff happens when it shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part. I mean, there's even some variation in terms of like the bloom mechanics on the weapons, which I know a lot of people really don't like. So it really does in a lot of ways. I think the competitive side of Fortnite, which has tried time and time again to really take off, and I'm not sure it'll ever hit a level where it's interesting in the same way that like you or I could go watch a match of CS:GO and become invested in it. It's a lot harder to do that with Fortnite if you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Um, and I think part of that is that it never catered quite enough to its competitive player base. And I know it has made some strides recently, but I wonder if that's not going to be a sticking point when if we look back on this in 5 to 10 years and Fortnite isn't a thing. I would say that's probably reason number one,
Hmm.
because it is important to have a competitive balance. And it's not for a lack of trying. I just feel like they haven't quite nailed it.
Yeah, and it might be a mistake just to. I see what you're saying. Whereas, like, obviously having a competitive like atmosphere and player base definitely keeps games alive. Like,
Yeah,
there's no reason CS:GO should still be around, but
yeah,
it is. Um, and it's a good game and it's an easy to follow. But I think that's a BR's worst quality is you can't keep up with a map of 100 people.
really difficult. Yeah,
Yeah. Even like MOBAs, it's hard to cast and like broadcast those because you're on different points of the map, and that's usually just like 3.5 places in a map.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I guess, yeah. More speaking of its flaws, I guess as personally, I don't really care as much about the competitive aspect, but more of like the mechanics. You did mention the bloom. I was you can't see it, but I was making a face when you mentioned that. I It's kind of been surprisingly recent. Within the past like 5 years, I've become more and more shooter based, and knowing that in a lot of games I would be able to kill somebody, and then watching them kill me because they pull out a shotgun and one tap me is frustrating because I'm like two 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 two. I've clicked my mouse individually on him. I'm watching my little targeting thing, reticle. That's it.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
That's
for
it.
sure.
Boom. Word vocabulary. Um, and I'll like be like, why isn't he taking damage? And then I'll get one shot, and I'm like, okay, neat. Because I
Yeah,
feel like
so
I'm a better shooter than the other player, but the other guy is better at Fortnite.
right. And I think there's a lot of really interesting things to be discussed there, right? Like so yes, that might be a core feature that people wouldn't like about Fortnite, and I think that's fair. But what I do sort of appreciate about it is that it's so dependent on positioning that there are moments where if I am hit by a shotgun, it mostly means I shouldn't have ever let that person get close enough, right?
Hmm.
And I think you do see that among better players. But that being said, there are moments where I'll aim a shotgun, and you can like go back and watch replays in Fortnite,
Hmm.
and 90% of my reticle is on the other player's head,
Right.
and it just so happens that the 10% that time just totally whiffed. And there's enough variation in that shooting mechanic that it is frustrating. It does feel like it appeals to players who might be worse at aiming.
Hmm.
I think there's certainly that contingent too, and I think that's relevant to the previous point, Skia, is that Fortnite does a lot of things to try and make it so that even players who aren't very good can still have that rise out of getting a kill.
Hmm.
And even if it's not totally deserved, it's something that they have been, that's how they calculate their game, like how they develop it. So I think that is its biggest overarching problem, is that it can't really figure out, do we want competitive players to feel like they are better than lower tier, or do we want lower tier to feel like they have a chance to get better?
Hmm.
And sort of like walking that fine line, I think, has been difficult for Fortnite.
Yeah, and I feel like it gets even more crazy when actually on either side of kind of the MMR ratio.
Yeah,
I feel like at the lower end is when you'll get one tapped by a shotgun and be like, oh no, what did I do wrong? Well, you could have
right.
distanced yourself from them. At the same time, you kind of whiff a shot that, even though most of your bullets seem to go into their bodies, it did like 12 damage.
Yeah,
And little things like that. And I guess that accounts to, as we were saying, Fortnite is kind of a random game. It is a little bit kind of whatever you pull out of the hat that particular
yeah.
round. It's part of why
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things do feel different each game. Um, but I also feel like, as far as giving lower level players a chance, it might not be the right way to do it. Because if, in terms of like the top players being different from the lower players, even at the time when I was keeping up with the game, I had finally learned that building was important and all that. If someone was better at building than me, you just don't stand a chance.
Yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah, you
And I
can.
think, but I think that Skia, that one of the important things, in assessing all of this, is that like that variation in like trying to make each game feel independent from the last one, and the ability to, it's like, okay, is shooting more important than building, is also part of what I think Fortnite used to leverage itself as being different from everything else.
Mhm.
um where it felt like, maybe myself, if you and I go play like PUBG or whatever, and you're probably going to smoke me. You've had, years of like Twitch based shooter experience.
Mhm.
But Fortnite gave me this out. They're like, hey, you like these types of games, but like now is a good time to try and learn this technique that nobody else has really put time and effort into. And so I think that was kind of its out. And then slowly that transformed into a little bit of a problem, like we're discussing.
Yeah. And again, yeah, like that's always good to have in a game where it's a unique thing to kind of learn. Um, I will say, yeah, if the difference between the transferable skills like shooting and positioning and movement and BR mindset becomes too different from, are you good at those things or are you good at Fortnite specifically, I feel like that's when games start to have trouble.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, just how good the player base is, when they are at the top, is very intimidating. I feel like
Oh yeah.
me and you could hop into Apex or even PUBG, really, or some other BR right now, and probably have a okay time. As far as our success is concerned, how much fun we're having or not is a different story. But like, we do okay. Um,
Yeah.
if I took a random friend and put him in Fortnite who hadn't played it before. This actually happened just the other week. We played like 2 games. He doesn't even say anything. He just logs off the game. He's like, "I'll see you around." I'm just I'm like, okay. Whereas like that same friend, we played Apex, and it was like, "Oh yeah, this is fun. I
Yeah.
understand this. This makes sense to me." Um,
Hmm.
and that's not to say that Fortnite isn't clear about the skill sets that you need to work on, as we were saying earlier, but it's definitely doesn't pull punches when you're kind of met with this very intimidating skill ceiling that you have to get near to.
Yeah, so they've actually tried to tweak this a little bit by introducing, I don't know if you encountered any of these when you were playing them, but like bots into the game.
Oh yeah.
So they try and trick you into thinking that you're playing against like a full player base. And
Hmm.
this isn't because people aren't playing Fortnite. It's because they're trying to get you to get kills.
Right.
And so they've tightened the game up elsewhere, but then sort of loosened it at the lower ends of the spectrum by inserting these things that make it a little easier to get kills. So it is interesting. I know they know that it's a problem, but I don't think they're ever going to be able to address it in the same way that, like, just like you said, like if we pop into Apex, our combined history with shooters is we're going to go in and be fine.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. It feels intuitive, where Fortnite really doesn't, and it takes a lot of practice and a lot of experience, and that can be frustrating. And that may ultimately mean its demise. Like even I am less likely to go back into Fortnite. I still do occasionally, but I'm less likely to go back into Fortnite because I can't offer up 50 hours a week practicing this game.
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Hmm. And where it is, kind of easy to get into because of like the more forgiving aiming.
Yeah.
It also reminds me of like when I was trying to get one of our friends into League of Legends, which is definitely compared to even Fortnite, very unforgiving to try to learn, and
Right.
pretty unfun to try to learn at that. Um, and it was just so difficult to get them to try to learn these very unique, like MOBA specific things. Whereas, yeah, Fortnite is kind of the same way. It's kind of like, oh yeah, it's because he built a value. Oh yeah, it's because he had this item. Um,
Yeah.
if you learn all those things, is it worth it? I think so. It's a good game, but there again, do you have the time to keep up with it? Whereas, hop into another game with more transferable skills. I don't really feel as rusty at Apex or PUBG, and I still play those pretty frequently.
Oh yeah. And if I may, Skia, offer up one more thing I don't like
You
about
may.
Fortnite, it's that I feel like it doesn't reward aggressiveness enough. Where and I honestly I don't know if in regards to something like PUBG, I haven't kept up with that enough in the last like 6 months to a year.
Hmm.
But I do feel like Fortnite in a lot of ways doesn't really reward you for making kills, but especially at like higher levels of play, because almost every battle is like the time to kill is a little slow, depending on like what weapon you're using, but it, you often come away damaged one way or another. You
Hmm.
often come away with less resources one way or another. I feel like the game has never found that kind of balance. And I know they have made strides recently, as like if you get a kill you get some extra shield and stuff like that, which is nice.
Hmm.
But I think that's one of the fundamental flaws of Fortnite as well. It's like there is not a lot of good reasons to not just build yourself into a tunnel and try and wait things out. So there is that too. I think that's something that just on the level of like specific to this genre, I'm not sure that Fortnite has ever expanded enough where it's like, oh, it feels good to go out and just chase somebody down.
Yeah.
And specifically if I really want to win, if I'm really
Hmm.
trying to hunt down a victory. So
Yeah, and that's actually very true. I have not personally experienced the give a shield if you kill a guy thing yet, or I just haven't noticed it. I'm not sure. But yeah,
it's in a specific mode. I don't think they have it in the general.
okay.
This is like their competitive mode. Yeah.
Well, honestly, it would probably be good if they added it in some form or fashion. Because
Yeah.
like PUBG, it's very survivalistic. I was talking with Kai when we shot that. It was it's very survival, gritty military style. So if you don't kill someone, if you don't find a squad, you might not have the supplies to even make it. Let alone like if whether or not you even see another player. It's do you
Right.
have enough to get through the shield? Do you have enough ammo to just ward people away? You need to kill people. Apex, you need those shield charges. You need a new shield. You need that purple shield, which is another problem. But we're
Yeah.
not talking about that game. But yeah, you need to kill people in order to keep current with the game. In Fortnite,
Right.
you need some blue, some purple weapons, which are pretty easy to come by. That's one of the
Yeah.
pros. By the way, we'll put that in the pro column. Very
Yeah.
easy to get
I think
weapons
that
and
could
stuff.
go either way. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
At the same time, it's like you don't really need to do anything with the game. Even
Right.
in the middle of a fight, you find yourself in a fight, you put some blocks around yourself, and you have your quick build button, and they can't even aggress on you. It's
Well, I think that's another thing about the game is that it does reward exploring. So it's like it puts that emphasis on Well, you could go try and seek out encounters, or you could go walk around some of the cool areas that we have set up.
Hmm.
And almost always the latter is more appropriate for a victory than the former. So yeah, it's one of those things where it's Fortnite is a lot of that, Skia, where I'm not sure we can compartmentalize it into good or bad. It's Fortnite for better or worse, and it's really hard sometimes to say, is that good or is it bad? It's more of just like a, I like this or I don't like this, and it is difficult for me to say. Some things are good and bad in Fortnite. There's a lot of that.
I think that's a good way to put it, and that almost summarizes every single word we've said so far this evening,
Yeah.
which is just, it might be good, it might be bad, but what it is Fortnite.
Yeah.
Um, so I guess we'll kind of get rolling a little bit more. I mean, we could obviously talk about any singular game for hours, but
Yeah.
I guess kind of moving on to some of the more things I wanted to make sure we talked about. Kind of affect we kind of talked about how time is gonna affect this game, how it has affected the game.
Yeah.
So I actually don't really think we need to go in too much more in depth on that unless you have any other points.
Yeah, just one closing thought.
Yeah.
As Fortnite, I think enters I believe it is its third year of development.
Something
At
like
least if you date back to the survival, like the original Fortnite. But one thing that I think is going to be really interesting to watch about Fortnite moving forward is it currently has one map, and that map changed significantly in its chapter 2. But will we ever see this game take a structural leap, in that we, whether it is chapter 3 or it's like Fortnite 2 or whatever, like will this franchise ever take a structural leap where it gambles on the next building? Like we were talking about that. Will we see another game gamble on some big game-changing mechanic or genre-changing mechanic? And or will Fortnite feel content to continue being what it is? And I think ultimately it probably will. And so what we're much more likely to see, I think, Skia, is like a very, very slow death rather than, oh, this game is dead now, which people say and exaggerate a lot about. But it's like, I don't think we're going to get that with Fortnite. I think 10 years, there are still going to be people playing this game, but it won't be as much as, are playing the game now. I don't think Fortnite is this thing that's going to, stand the test of time. I don't think it's going to have a Halo-esque run where, we had Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3, and then, I don't think it'll ever quite be that, but it landed like, just with such a huge boom. And I think that we'll be experiencing the effects of that for the next 10 years. I'm not sure about beyond that.
I think you're exactly right. And it is because Fortnite is probably thinking right now, we could make a new leap. We could completely throw some things out the window, add some new things in to kind of maybe fix the problems we have. But why would we? We're doing great. Look at our player base. Look at our numbers. Look at everything. Like we're doing very well. And honestly, maybe they would change something. Like, in a world where they would do that, I would log on and be like, hey, this isn't Fortnite. And I'm one of the people who would like to see these changes the most. So I think you're right.
Well, let me flip the question. I'll be the interviewer for just a second, Skia.
Okay,
if you could
let me take a seat
one,
here. Yeah. Oh,
yeah. If you could change one thing about Fortnite, what would it be? You could remove the building mechanic. You do whatever you want, but you're in charge of this game right now, and you can do one thing to change it. What would it be?
I would change the way building works. I wouldn't remove it, but I would change it in a way that it doesn't feel like an earthbender is around, from Avatar. Where it doesn't feel like an earthbender is around me, but more of like what the name implies, a Fortnite. Like someone builds up a fort, and then once we have that fort kind of established, we start shooting at each other. Like almost how the single player or co-op mode was meant to be, played in the beginning.
So like a slower paced Fortnite almost. It's like more methodical.
Yeah, where what you're building isn't you're creating a new landscape, but what you're building is your fort that you defend. Yeah.
Which is what it was. When the game first kicked off, that's kind of what it was. Like, it was sort of a, I'm gonna take my time, but I don't see anybody around me, so you and I, if we're playing doubles or whatever, it's like we're gonna build up our fort,
Yeah.
and that we're preparing for end game, and that was a fun feeling. Now it's not like that. You're
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You can't.
So yeah, you can't do that. Mm-mm.
Um, we haven't talked too much about this. Maybe, I don't know. I don't remember. uh, as far as the player base is concerned, I know we get a lot of people that are saying like, "Hey, this is the 12-year-olds' game. Look at them." Obviously, that's far from true. But what? How do you think the community has kind of impacted the way that Fortnite has gone and will go?
Yeah, well, I think it's more pertinent, Skia, to ask how has the popularity of this game affected its development? Because I think in a lot of ways, the weird mystique of the events and the MMO style, I don't think exists without its popularity. Similarly, I think this game is probably better developed if it wasn't trying to appeal to such a wide range of folks. Now, when I say better, I mean for you and I. I don't necessarily mean that for everybody, but I think, yeah, like a lot of the things we've discussed, I would be surprised if they hadn't been taken care of with a more focused community. Like, I think that's one of the reasons CS:GO has been so good, is because it has that extremely focused community where it's like it knows who its influencers are, it knows how to appeal to those influencers, and those influencers are listening to their respective bases. Whereas like, I mean, if you're trying to develop for Fortnite, where are you looking? Like, there's even in the conversation between you and I, we have different feelings about this game. Who are they listening to? And I think they've done a pretty good job, honestly, of going with their gut instinct and saying like, hey, you know what, you may not like mechs, but we think it's going to be good for the game, and we're going to keep pushing it. Like, we're going to keep doing it. And now, of course, I don't think that worked out very well for them in that specific instance, but I can think of 100 other times it really did.
Yeah.
I can think of times where, like, when you may remember like the double pump shotgun mechanic that was there. It was sort of like a glitch. And people were really upset when they took that out. And I think ultimately it has been a lot better for the game. It's things like that where they've sort of made decisions on their own accord, instead of listening to like a more focused group. And I think that has its ups and downs. But again, I think that is the way that it's been most affected. If you ignore the fact that it has led to like Twitch superstars like Ninja and Tim the Tat Man, all of these people who have like just spiked in popularity, like Dr. Lupo, whatever.
All right.
Like that, it's done more for like gameplay content than probably any other game has before. Like it has driven a whole group of people. You can go ask any 10-year-old what they want to be, and 8 out of 10 of them will say, I did the math wrong there, 4 out of 5 of them will say, I want to be a YouTuber, or I want to be a streamer, or whatever. Like, it has created a renaissance of people just creating content about video games, and that's good and it's bad. But there is no doubt in my mind that this has been the most impactful force of voices in terms of their impact on a specific game. We'll just never know how. We'll never know how Ninja influenced this game, or how you or I posting on like a forum or posting this podcast would influence them. We don't know. We don't know who they're listening to, but I do know that it has moved the game and it has helped it survive, more so than I think most other games communities do. Like, this is a game that is about the people playing it rather than about the game itself, I think.
Absolutely. I just think that was very well put. I'm kind of thinking about the double pump strat, whereas a lot of like the top streamers were actually very mad that they took that out, but it was something that they got over, because I feel like eventually they were like, oh, okay, this is all right, cool. I'm personally very happy that you can use SMGs now viably.
Yeah,
that's
viably.
Yeah. Who knew? And you never would have thought either, but they did make those changes, and they are moving in those directions. Again, they're going to keep experimenting, and like we said before, that's probably for the best of the game, to kind of just keep throwing content at us. Yeah, it's going to be hard to say, and oftentimes it does feel random, but when you've got this many people of this many skill sets, of this many backgrounds playing this game, you won't know.
Right. It's impressive, honestly. Like, when you put it through that lens, like this many people from this many backgrounds, this many skill sets, it's kind of impressive how good of a job they've done appeasing most people. So yeah, I agree with you.
So I think we've done a very good job of kind of going in depth about the things that deserve to be going in depth about. Hey everybody. So I guess to kind of start wrapping up,
Yeah.
I do actually want to share one of my most memorable moments of Fortnite, and it wasn't even mine. It was actually watching you.
Oh,
Yeah, we
I
were
don't know what this
playing.
is.
Yeah, we were playing a squad game, and I mean, you've
Uh-huh.
won so many games, Ben. You might not remember because you're
So
just
many
that good.
games,
Yeah.
thousands and thousands of games.
So the rest of our squad had died, and we'd gotten pretty far, and it was just you and there was like two other squads or so,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know how they were able to make it work, but they built like this giant flat platform above Tilted. I don't know how it
Yeah.
didn't get shot down, but apparently they knew
Why
how.
didn't I shoot it down? Why
I
didn't
don't know. But you heard the final fight going on above
Mhm.
Tilted Towers, and you know the storm was right there, so there's like all kinds of crackling lightning and stuff, and all you hear is
Right.
guns and magic going off.
It
And
is magic. It's magic.
it
That
is
those
magic.
final moments are.
And you just build up to it, and we're like, Ben, what are you doing? You should like wait it out. And you're just like, nah, I got this. And you literally kill like at least 6 of the final 8 members and just win us the game.
Oh
And it
yeah.
was just like, that's ridiculous.
That's where Fortnite comes alive for me. Is like it in its chaos.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's no structure really to Fortnite. And I know that's antithesis to the its building mechanic, but there really isn't. There's no rhyme or reason sometimes, and that's what makes the moments so fun and memorable. Like you're saying, there are so many points in that, and now that you mention it, I recall when that happened. I think that's when we were doing our stupid four corners thing where we all dropped on the various
Oh,
parts of the map.
Jesus. Oh, man.
So but yeah, it was that's exactly what Fortnite is. It's like these 30 seconds to 2 minutes of chaos filtered in by like mildly pleasant roaming and exploring and having fun with friends, and then all of a sudden it's just like, man, it's like somebody injects something right into your veins, and it's good. And that is what Fortnite is that those moments of chaos filtered by like mild pleasantry.
I really like the line where you said, antithesis to the building mechanic, it's chaos.
Yeah.
That's a good line. So any closing thoughts for you, Ben? We are at, I know you've got a place to be, but also we're about at that time anyways.
I've had a lot of fun doing this, so thanks for having me on. But I do have a couple things I wanted to talk about in regards to Fortnite. Why it's one of my favorite games of all time. The first thing is that the music. This is gonna sound so dumb, Skia, but the original menu music for Fortnite is the most like established thing in my brain. I can never let go of that like low thumb. And if you're listening to this now and you don't know what I'm talking about, type in like Fortnite original main menu music theme or something like that. And you can listen to it forever and ever and ever. And it sort of sets this weird tone about like Fortnite. It's just this weird game. And I knew it right away. It's almost like a sci-fi theme. I don't know how to make it or what to make out of it, but it exists in a way that told me instantly this game is gonna be weird. And it has been ever since it released, and it didn't try to do anything else. So in a world where every single game is trying to look as much like real life as it possibly can, and how the violence of these games is supposed to be like weighty and impactful, Fortnite never did any of that. It was like I knew I was just in this weird alternative universe, and I didn't have to ask questions. I just got to experience. And so that I think ultimately is my takeaway from Fortnite. And if I have to pick one memory about Fortnite, it's the first time I ever won a match, Skia. And it was a couple of nights. I had been playing for a couple of nights in a row, and I was playing on Xbox, which I quickly moved on from because the experience of mouse and keyboard for Fortnite is like, it's almost metaphysical. But I was playing, and I think I had like a kill. I was crouched in a corner. I was waiting out the last couple of fights, and I just picked this guy off, at the last second, and I won. And I remember this surge, like this rush. And I'm a pretty mellow guy, but I remember just like this rush through my veins. And I still don't think I'll ever a video game has ever made me feel like that. And of course, I think that's part of like the genre. I remember experimenting with PUBG and sort of feeling similar about it. I don't think I ever got that victory early on. And so it like I knew at that moment this genre was something different. Like and it wasn't just Fortnite, but it was this feeling of having conquered 99 other people, whether it was lucky or not. It didn't matter. It was this feels good. I remember thinking to myself, I love Souls. It's like when I took down a hard boss in Dark Souls. Like those feelings are so fleeting when I'm playing games that it's hard not to remember them when they happen. And Fortnite has delivered dozens and dozens of that kind of those fleeting moments. So really thankful for Fortnite. I'm glad that we've gotten to play some matches, Ski. I hope we get to play some in the future. I'll drag you back into it. We'll go play some custom games, which is actually something we didn't get a chance to talk about. But I really love the customization of the everything Fortnite's done with its like build your own worlds and things like that. So
I'm working on a moon base.
Oh, that sounds good. I remember we last time we chatted, you were actually working on like a multiplayer map, and I don't think we ever got to play it. I would love to do that sometime.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Thank you so much for being on the cast here.
Very excited to be on it.
Yeah, I knew that you would challenge me and just kind of open up my mind because of just who you are and how you see video games. So to that end, yeah, I want to thank you again. Any final thoughts?
No final thoughts. I'm excited. I'm really excited for your next episode. If it's like about the lost, or like some of the lost in the shuffle battle royale games, I'm fascinated. I know of a couple that'll be on there, and I'm not going to spoil them right now. Let the listeners wait till next week. So I'm excited to listen in on that. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. That episode is going to be chaotic for a lot of reasons. But anyways, take care. Signing off. Get good, Scrubs.